It will change human history. That could be a sentence by itself. So this is an independent clause. In this case, therefore, we have a subordinate clause first, followed by an independent clause. The two things work together to create a single, complete thought. If extraterrestrial life is ever discovered, it will change human history. The first clause sets up a possibility, and the second clause explains what would happen if that possibility comes true. So the two clauses work together to express one complete idea. And therefore we have a correct sentence which is known as a complex sentence, because that's what a complex sentence does. It combines two different kinds of clauses, one an independent clause and the other a subordinate clause, makes them into a whole to express a single thought. Notice that it doesn't matter what order the clauses are in. The subordinate clause could come first, or the independent clause could come first. In this particular sentence, the subordinate clause comes first, but it could have been the other way around. Either way, it's considered a complex sentence. The fourth and most difficult kind of sentence is known as the compound complex sentence. The compound complex sentence contains two or more independent clauses and one or more subordinate clauses. So it's like a combination of the compound sentence with the complex sentence. As you can see, the compound complex sentence must have at least three clauses. And some writers in English, William Faulkner is a famous novelist who is a good example of this. Some writers in English write sentences that go on for many, many words, and in some cases even a page or more. And some of the sentences in William Faulkner contain 10 or 12 or more separate clauses. Those are very complicated sentences, and their grammar is very difficult to untangle. But a compound complex sentence must contain at least three clauses. Let's take a look at an example, and we'll see how this works. Although no sign of life on other worlds has yet been found, the search continues, and many predict success. In this sentence, we have three groups of words, and each of these three is a clause, because each contains a subject and a verb. Let's take a look at each one. The first group of words says, although no sign of life on other worlds has yet been found. This is a clause because it contains a subject and a verb. The verb actually happens to be three words long. Has been found is the complete verb. You need all three words to make up the verb in this case. The word yet, which is stuck in the middle, happens to be an adverb. And adverbs do sometimes interrupt verbs in this way. But that isn't an important detail for right now. The verb is has been found, and the subject is sign. Sign has been found is the heart of this clause. Now, looking at the clause as a whole, is it an independent clause or a subordinate clause? Could it stand alone as a sentence? Well, the answer is no, it couldn't. Read it again. Although no sign of life on other worlds has yet been found. Perhaps you can hear that something is missing. The author seems to be building up to some conclusion, but no conclusion is presented. We can't tell what is supposed to happen as a result of the fact that no sign of life on other worlds has yet been found. We feel as though we're left hanging. Therefore, this clause doesn't express a complete thought, so it's a subordinate clause. The telltale sign, of course, is that it begins with a subordinating conjunction, although. Almost always, a clause that begins with the word although will be a subordinate clause and unable to stand alone as a sentence. What about the second clause? The next group of words in the sentence reads, the search continues. Here again we have a subject and a verb. The verb is continues and the subject is search. Could this stand alone as a sentence? Yes, it could. It expresses a complete thought. It sounds complete. And although it only consists of three words, nonetheless it would make up a complete sentence by itself and could stand alone. The search continues. So here we have an independent clause. What about the last group of words in the sentence? And many predict success. Once again, this is a clause because it has a subject and a verb. The verb is predict, and the subject is many. Could this stand alone as a sentence? and many predict success. Yes, it could. This expresses a complete thought, and it could stand alone as a sentence. So now let's step back and look at what we have. We have a sentence consisting of 3 clauses. The first one is a subordinate clause, the second one is an independent clause, and the third one is another independent clause. That's what makes this a compound, complex sentence. Notice that the sentence is not terribly long or terribly complicated to understand. You probably didn't find it very difficult to understand what was being said in the sentence. Nonetheless, this is about as complicated from a grammatical standpoint as a sentence can get. Of the 4 types of sentences, the compound complex sentence is the most complicated type. So if you understand how this sentence is put together, you have a pretty good chance of understanding how any and all sentences are put together. The only difference when you get to a sentence written by someone like William Faulkner is that more and more clauses are piled on, but it just continues to be more of the same kind of thing, more of a compound complex sentence with more and more independent and subordinate clauses added on. Notice that as we've discussed these 4 types of sentences, the simple sentence, the compound sentence, the complex sentence, and the compound complex sentence, we've seen certain rules that apply to your own writing and to any academic work that you do related to English or grammar. We've seen that it's a mistake to let a subordinate clause stand alone as a sentence. When you do that, you create a sentence fragment, which is considered a grammatical error. Here's another type of grammatical error to watch out for. It's called the run-on sentence. Now, what is a run-on sentence? Many people think, from the name of this error, that a run-on sentence is a sentence that is simply too long. Perhaps they figure that a sentence that's more than 50 words, let's say, is a run-on sentence. Well, a run-on sentence really has nothing to do with the length. There's a very simple definition of a run-on sentence, which should make it easy for you to avoid it in your own writing. A run-on sentence includes 2 or more independent clauses that are joined only by a comma or by nothing at all. Now let's stop and remember how we defined a compound sentence. Remember, a compound sentence contains 2 or more independent clauses. But when we discussed the compound sentence, we saw that there were 2 appropriate ways of connecting the 2 independent clauses. One way would be to use a comma and a coordinating conjunction, such as and, or but. The other correct way would be to use a semicolon. A run-on sentence comes about when 2 independent clauses are taken and simply jammed together with no punctuation between them, or perhaps just a comma. Doing that makes an incorrect sentence. It's a run-on. The connection between the 2 independent clauses is not clear, and it's considered a grammatical error. So if you have a teacher who says, you've made a mistake in your paper by writing a run-on sentence, this is what the teacher means. And you can see that the way to correct it is by following the proper rules for creating a compound sentence. Here's an example of a run-on sentence. Visit the City Science Museum. You'll see some fascinating exhibits about outer space. Here we have 2 clauses. Visit the City Science Museum. That's an independent clause, and it could stand alone as a sentence. Then we have another clause. You'll see some fascinating exhibits about outer space. What's the subject and the verb in each of these clauses, by the way? The first clause may be a little bit tricky. It has a verb, visit, but the subject doesn't appear. This is an imperative clause, namely one that is giving you an order or a recommendation or a suggestion. And the subject doesn't appear normally in an imperative sentence. The subject is understood to be you. What this clause is saying is you visit the City Science Museum. So an imperative sentence is an exception to our rule that a subject and a verb must always appear. In an imperative sentence, the subject may be understood. In our second clause, the subject is you, and the verb is will see. In this case, it takes the form of the contraction apostrophe LL instead of spelling out the word will at full length. But the words "you'll see" really mean